Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Salesforce Makes Sense. In this video, we'll continue understanding asynchronous Apex as part of our Salesforce Developer Masterclass. In the previous tutorial, we looked at future methods, and now that we are comfortable and understood future methods and a bit of async Apex, now is the right time to jump into queueable Apex, right? So unlike future methods, basically you don't need to annotate your methods, right? Queueable is wherein you can actually create a class, implement an interface, override a method of that interface, and basically go about it. Okay. We'll look into a use case of how this works, but the primary idea of why did we jump into queueable from future is because of certain limitations we had on the future methods. What are those certain limitations? The two prominent limitations were, the first thing, that the method parameters only accept primitive data types, right? A list of string or a number or an integer. No SObjects provisions were available. That problem is solved here in the queueable side, right? And the second bit is the chaining, meaning we got an error that says future method cannot be called from another future method. But in queueable, you can actually chain another queueable method from this particular queueable class. So these are the key two advantages that differentiate future from queueable, and we'll look at how this is implemented. All right, so the first point, to use queueable, you need to implement the queueable interface. So I'll quickly take you to VS Code and we'll create a new Apex class here, and I'll call it async queueable use case. All right, now previously what we did was we created a method here, and to make it asynchronous to use future, we use the annotation, right? But this does not hold true, or this is not how you would want to do this for queueable. To make this particular class a queueable class, what you need to do is you need to implement the queueable interface. So when you say implements, it basically implements an interface. Now this is an in-house interface available, and whenever you are actually implementing an interface, right, you always have to ensure that you override the method that comes as part of that particular interface. And if you notice, when I try to deploy this particular class, because I've implemented this interface, it is telling me that you need to implement the execute method that comes from the queueable class. So what do I need to do? I need to say public void. I can keep it static or non-static. Let's keep it static for now. Public static void execute, and I can say this is my method. All right. Now, if I try to just put the method like this and I say deploy, it still gives me an error, and it says that this is not the right method you have put, because the execute method from the queueable interface accepts a parameter which is of type queueable context. This is the queueable context variable. Now if I try to deploy this, let's see what happens. So this deploys fine. Perfect. So this deploys fine. So this is how you actually create your queueable class. All right. Save. Now your question would be, so Himanshu, how do we actually run this, right? Because with normal Apex classes, we call the methods, right? Here, do we have to call the execute method, or what is the process? So in order to use a queueable class, you need to enqueue it by calling the EnqueueJob method. All right, I'll quickly show that to you. If I go to the anonymous window and I say System.enqueueJob, I have to create an instance of this particular class, and that's it. That will queue my job. It will enqueue my job, and this is basically a schedule, a queueable job, right? If I go ahead and say execute, it enqueues the job, executes it, and then shows me the debug logs. And if you notice, my execute method has automatically run. That's the first method that automatically runs whenever you run a queueable class, and the first queueable class debug log is showing up here. Perfect. All right, I hope you understood how do you define, declare, or create a scheduler, create a queueable, and then you actually call it. How do you call it? You use the System.enqueueJob method. All right, from where does the queueable class come from? It comes from the system class. What is a queueable? It is an interface. Okay, if it is an interface, what method does it contain? It contains the execute method, right? What is the variable, or what is the data type of the method param that comes as part of execute? It is of queueable context. These are your 5 interview questions. How do you execute a queueable class? You use the System.enqueueJob method. All right, so very quickly we covered five to six interview questions, and that's the basics of it. Now let's take a look at what's written here. To use the queueable, you need to implement the queueable interface. We did that. And override the execute method, which is of queueable context. We did that. Okay. You can use non-primitive data types when using queueable, even objects. This is something that's different from future methods. We'll look at how to do this. Okay. And then you can chain one queueable job to another queueable job. We'll see how to do this. You can use enqueueJob method from the system class to queue a job. We just did that. Okay. Cool. Now let's look at chaining first of all. Okay, let's look at chaining. What is chaining? If I'm on this execute method and I have a requirement to call another queueable maybe, right? That's the ask. Now this thing was not possible with future method. Could I call one future method from another? No. But with queueable, you can actually do that. If I go ahead and create a new class, I call it async queueable use case 2, and this is my class, and I'll just go ahead and say this is also a queueable class, and this also implements the queueable interface, and this has the execute method which is getting overridden, and it is the queueable context variable type. The class is ready. If I say deploy, the class should get deployed fine, right? And I'll put a debug log here, system.debug called from queueable 2. All right, save and then deploy. Right now, can I call this particular class from this class in the execute method? I can by using the enqueueJob option, which means chaining of queueable jobs is allowed. Chaining of future methods is not allowed. If I try to deploy this here, does it first of all compile fine? Yes, it compiles fine. And if I try to go back to my developer console, and if I try to execute my enqueueJob for the first use case queueable, what happens? In the logs, you'll notice that there are two queueable handlers that have come. Right? The first one is open here, which is from 126.25. Which one is that? This one, 126.25. And the second one is this queueable handler, which is the second call. So that's your second chained queueable. If you want to double check and confirm, if you take a look at the debug only log, this is your first queueable. And if you take a look at the debug only log, this is your second queueable. Makes sense? So if this makes sense, you write queueable makes sense. And I hope you have written future methods make sense as well. All right. Cool. Basics, but these basics need to be clear, only then you will be able to use it efficiently. All right. Awesome. So now you understood that chaining can be done, and if you understand, you are able to call it from one queueable to another, right? Now you might ask, Himanshu, if this is queued, is this in the future? Yes, it's kind of queued, meaning it will run very soon. All right, it will run very soon based on the resource availability. Now then, Himanshu, can we track this somewhere? Can we see it? Yes, you can see it. So if you go to Salesforce and if you go to setup, and if you take a look at a section called Apex jobs, so if you type Apex jobs, right, you will see Apex jobs available here, and this lists all the calls that we have made here. All right, so you'll see all the queueable calls that you have made will show up here. All right. This is the place where you can see, and right now if you see, the queueable jobs have completed, and you can actually also track your failures here. All right, you'll see that, okay, this has failed, what is the reason, and you can actually look into that particular class and you can rectify it. It's very helpful and very useful. Then you'll ask, okay, Himanshu, this is on the UI side. Is it possible to query or see it? Yes, it is possible. So this Apex job is nothing but an Apex async job. So if I take you to the query editor, and if I type select ID, comma, let's say status from Apex async, I think it is async Apex, okay, not Apex async, async Apex job. And if I say execute, you see 15 records are showing up till date, right? And if I want to get more information, I can open this particular object. It is an internal object, and I can, let me just reduce the size of this bar. Let's reduce it a bit. Yeah, and now I can say ID, job type, Apex class, status, number of errors, completed date. I think that should be all. Let's say query, and let's say execute. Right? So if you notice, some are future calls, some are queueable calls, and if I just order it by descending sort, right? So order by created date desk limit 5, right? If I say execute, you'll see that the latest calls are these and they have been completed, and this is the Apex class that has executed, the Apex class reference ID, and this is the job ID. So whenever you want to actually take a look at a specific entry and what is the status, you can actually use the where clause, and you can say where ID equal to this particular job ID, whatever has come as part of it, this value. Okay, and where do you find this ID in your code? This ID is basically returned as part of the enqueueJob. This returns a ID variable value, ID equal to job ID. See, if I try to do something like decimal job ID, I'll show you why am I doing this. I'll say deploy. Deployment fails and it says illegal assignment from ID to decimal, meaning this entire thing returns a ID, and that ID is nothing but the job ID. Make sense? All right, and I can actually print this job ID, and this will tell you which job it is, and then you can actually search it easily. It is helpful in places where you want to do auditing and debugging. All right, each queueable that executes has its own ID, meaning the first one will have its own ID, and then you enqueued this one, right? This enqueued will have a second job ID. So this will give you the second job ID. Make sense? If you want to see the job ID that executed the first queueable, you have to actually get it from here. You need to get it from here. This is your first enqueue, and when you enqueued the first one, inside it enqueued the second one. So this is your second job ID, meaning if you take a look at your developer console logs, you will see two queueable handlers, right? Two. So first job, second job. And if you notice, when you call a future method, it has a future handler. And now that you're calling a queueable, it is a queueable handler. Make sense? Just type in queueable makes sense. That gives me the confidence that yeah, you're understanding everything, right? So yes, you can chain one queueable job to another queueable job. That's the first thing. You can use non-primitive. This is something we'll still look at. Once the job is queued, you can use async Apex job to query and check the progress. This is what I showed you just now, right? And you can use enqueueJob methods from the system class to queue a job. And that's what we have done, right? Now, another thing that you can actually provision in queueable is you can add a delay on purpose. Now, you already understand that queueable will queue the job. Okay, fine. But is it possible, let's say I want to wait maybe 2 minutes or 5 minutes until everything has been processed and then I want to run my queueable. Is that possible, Himanshu? Yes, that is possible. How do you do it? You simply add a parameter here in your enqueueJob method. Okay, so if I put a parameter here that says, let's say 2, and if I go ahead and try to execute this, execute it fine. If I take a look at the Apex jobs and if I refresh my page here, you will notice that the new queueable has been queued for 3:02, meaning it will only execute 2 minutes later. Why? Because we put a 2-minute delay from the current time. What kind of delay can you put? You can put anything between 1 to 60 minutes here. And if you don't put anything, that is basically 0, so it will execute immediately. Make sense? So that is what is mentioned here. You can use the enqueueJob method and also add a delay parameter to which after the delay time is over, only then it will execute it. Okay, if the delay time is set to 0, the system tries to execute the job as soon as possible. And this delay attribute can also be set permanently for all queueable jobs. So how do you set it permanently for all queueable jobs? There's another setting available. You can type Apex settings. If you go to this Apex settings, let me go from here because it will ask me to open in Classic. Apex settings, you'll see that there's an option that says default minimum enqueue delay. So if you put 5 minutes, all the queueables in your system will execute with a delay of 5 minutes. They'll wait for 5 minutes and only then they will execute. But that's not a good practice to do. But yes, if that's a requirement, you can put it here, or on case-to-case basis, you can actually put it the way we just did it, right? We put a 5 minute here, we can put 2 minutes for something else, and that way you can enqueue your jobs. Make sense? Cool. So that was all about queueable. The only thing that's pending is basically I want to show you how do you actually use non-primitive data types, and I want to show you a use case, right? So I have a small use case here which says whenever a case is closed, create a task for the person assigned the case with a due date 30 days from case closure. Okay, so this has to trigger from the case trigger. I hope that is clear, because whenever the case is closed is the question. So I'll create a case trigger. I'll check when the case status is marked as closed or completed, whatever. Let's say escalated. Okay, I don't think closed is a status in case. I'll say escalated. As soon as the case is escalated, I want to create a task. Now this task creation can be done on the trigger, can be done via future, can be done via queueable, can be done through flows. All possibilities are there, but because we are discussing this tutorial, I want to show how it works, okay? How it functions. Awesome. Let's go into Salesforce and let's create a case trigger. So I'll go ahead and say create Apex trigger. I'll call it case trigger. This would be after update only, because I want to do this after the update of the case record status. I'll say if trigger dot is after and trigger dot is update. I want to say case trigger handler. I want to call my handler and say handle after update scenarios. Okay, and I'll pass my trigger dot new variable, which will contain the newly updated records. I'll create this Apex class case trigger handler. I'll create a Apex class. I'll call it case trigger handler, and now I'll just deploy this particular case trigger handler with the method public static void handle after update. What does it accept as parameter? Trigger.new, meaning list of case record. I hope you are clear with this stuff, because as per my understanding, you have already seen my triggers video and you have already mastered triggers. Let's say deploy. Deployed fine. Why did I deploy the trigger handler first? Because it is being referenced here. If this file does not exist, this file will not compile. So that's why I deployed the handler first. Now I'll deploy the case trigger file. All right. So both files have been deployed. Let's close the use case 2. What do we want to do? When case is closed, create a task. That's the whole idea. Okay. So right now the case is getting closed, but I want to basically create a task, right? So I'll say for each case in case records, I want to check if each case dot status is equal to escalated. Only then I want to create a case list, and I want to store those cases so that I can create a task for them. So I need a list variable. That list variable would be a case type. I'll call it case list is equal to new list of type case. Save. Till here we are all good. Very plain, very simple. Right? Now let's go ahead and check if this case list outside the for loop, if case list dot is not empty, only then I want to go ahead with task creation. Correct? Now where do I do the task creation? I can do it here. I can call another method. I can do it in a future method. I can do it in flows. I can do it in let's say queueable, but right now the use case is for queueable. So don't question me on why are we moving to queueable. This is just to show you how would you actually target these kind of questions with a queueable. Okay. The good part about Salesforce is there are 10 different answers. None of them is wrong as far as it, suffices the requirement. But right now let's use queueable. So what I would want to do is I'll say async queueable use case is something that I want to execute, or let's create a new queueable class. All right. I'll say case trigger task creator queueable. All right. I hope the spelling is correct. Yeah. Or let's just call it task creator queueable. All right. Now this is a queueable, meaning I need to implement the queueable interface and I need to override the execute method. Correct? So I'll just say queueable context. Perfect. I have done the base setup. Let's go ahead and say deploy. Done. This is deployed fine. Now what do I want to do? I want to actually call my queueable by calling the enqueueJob. Correct? So I'll say new case trigger task creator queueable. That's not the name, it is just task creator queueable. Let's remove this and let's say save, deploy. Okay, done. Now My problem is I have called the queueable, but how does this queueable get the case list? I need to pass it, right? Where am I passing it? I need to pass it as a parameter here. That's my only way. Because this value is available here in the list variable, I need to pass it. So if I'm passing it, what does it mean? It means I'm not using the default constructor, I'm using the parameterized constructor. And when I'm doing that, don't you think I need to create the same constructor here with the parameter? Yes, we'll have to do that. Okay, and I'll create a constructor. Now before creating this, I'll show you. See, if I try to save this and I say deploy, let's see what happens. Sorry, I'll just say deploy. So it says constructor not defined. See, the error is showing up. Why did I know beforehand? Because I was able to figure that out. If you're not able to figure it out, you'll see, okay, oh, I missed this. So I'll have to create this constructor, and then I'll come here and I'll create a list of case list. Save. Right? I've created the constructor. Let's say deploy. Now this is deployed fine, and now this should also deploy fine. Okay. Perfect. Our source class is deployed fine. The queue that we enqueued, the queueable, is also fine. But now how do you access this particular variable value here? You have just passed it, right? So to be able to access it, you need to create a variable on your queueable to able to actually access it. Okay. So I'll say case records, and this case records are nothing but whatever has come as part of the case list, and then this case records becomes a variable that you can access here. Does that make sense? Let's try to deploy this now. So using this case records, you'll go ahead and proceed in your execute method, and this case records, based on this, you will actually do your task creation. How? You'll say for each case in case records, you will create a task record, trec equal to new task, and you will say trec list dot add trec. Right? I've created a task record list, so I have to define it also. So I'll say list of task trec list is equal to new list of task, and I've just instantiated that variable. Okay, I don't need to debug my case records here. Let's get rid of it. Now for each case record, I'm creating a task, and now whenever I check if this particular list is not empty, I want to insert those task records. That's the whole idea. That was our use case. Correct? So I've just inserted them. Now when you're creating the task, you need to actually populate some important values. So to be able to do that, you can always look at the task object, and you can see the fields here. Okay, I kind of know which fields do we need to populate, so I'll just go ahead and do that. So I'll say subject should be equal to, let's say, follow up, right? Trec dot priority should be medium, trec dot due date, right? So that's activity date in task object is equal to 30 days from today, right? That was our use case. System dot today plus 30. See, that was our use case, 30 days from today. Okay, 30 days. And then trec dot what ID, we need the what ID to link the case, right? So this should be each case dot ID, the current case in question. And who should this be assigned to? This should be assigned to the case owner, let's say. So each case dot owner ID. Save. Perfect. So my task record is getting created, and then I'm just saying insert. Now if I try to deploy this, first of all, future methods used to give us an issue with the object type nomenclature, right? But if you see, we have been very easily been able to use the object data types, the non-primitive ones. Okay, now with this information in hand, let's go ahead and try to test this use case. Okay, let's go to Salesforce, and I want to find a case first of all that lets us, let's go to cases, and let's say let's go to this record which is with Himanshu, and it is currently closed. I want to actually escalate it, right? So if you see all the updates in the feed, there's nothing here. If I go ahead and say escalated and I say save, what happens? The case is escalated and a task is also created, right? And that task is nothing but the part of our queueable. If you take a look at the Apex jobs now, you will see a new queueable was called. The task creator queueable was called and it successfully completed. Make sense? Right? This was completed and the task record got created as part of our queueable code. And if you see, the due date is 30 days from today, status is not started, and it is related to the case record. The case record. Okay, and who's the owner? It is assigned to the same person who's the case owner, and the due date is what? 1st November, today is 1st October, 2nd October, so this is 30 days, yes, 31 days, right? So this is 1st November, perfect. Right, so this is how you can actually use your queueable. Now let's imagine that you had one more use case that you had to solve right after your task creation. Could you chain another queueable? Yes, you can chain another queueable. You could chain it right from the execute method, and you could call your second queueable from here. Is it possible? Yes, we just saw it is possible. No issues. That's the benefit or advantage that you get compared to future. All right. So I think that is all from the queueable side of the world. What I want from you guys is tell me that queueable makes sense and you are able to understand this concept a bit more clearly. And what I want from you is tell me use cases wherein you would want to use a future method, wherein you would want to use a queueable method, and what is your personal favorite? Like which one do you think is better? Like is it scenario based, or is it like always you should go for queueable or always you should go for future? And I'll revert back to your comments. Okay, let's see how your thought process is here. All right, I think that's all on the queueable side of the world. I'll see you in the next one where we talk about batch Apex. Bye.